I'm going to talk today about energy and climate. And that might seem a bit surprising because my full-time work at the Foundation is mostly about vaccines and seeds, about the things that we need to invent and deliver to help the poorest 2 billion live better lives. And that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet. And the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. I asked the top scientists on this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, so this is a wish. It's a very concrete wish that we invent this technology. If you gave me only one wish for the next 50 years, I can pick who's president, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love. So what do we have to do? What am I appealing to you to step forward and drive? We need to go for more research funding. When countries get together at places like Copenhagen, they shouldn't just discuss the CO2. They should discuss this innovation agenda. And you'd be stunned at the ridiculously low levels of spending on these innovative approaches. We do need the market incentives, CO2 tax, cap and trade, something that gets that price signal out there. We need to get the message out. We need to have this dialogue be a more rational, more understandable dialogue, including the steps that the government takes. This is an important wish, but it is one I think we can achieve. Thank you.
I really hope your wish comes true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Microsoft founder Bill Gates is making an extraordinary new commitment to save children's lives. In the biggest pledge ever made by a charity to a single cause, he will spend billions to get vaccines to every child on the planet. Tonight, he's one-on-one with our Dr. Besser.
Our foundation is committing over the next decade to spend over $10 billion on research into new vaccines and helping get vaccines delivered out to the poorest, where it can have really an unbelievable effect.
Vaccination has always been high on the Gates Foundation global agenda, but $1 billion a year more than doubles their previous investment.
The good news is that there's only about a dozen diseases that cause most of these deaths. So, a few more vaccines really getting out to the poorest can change things. Well, vaccinations are fundamental. You save lives, not just of your own children, but of other children by having those immunization rates be very high.
A huge commitment from one of the world's richest men to save the lives of some of the world's poorest people. Richard Besser, ABC News, New York.
Most important, I suspect each of you have a different answer to this, most important breakthrough.
Getting new vaccines to be created and getting those out and distributed. There's 2 new ones, which between them will save millions of lives. And those are just now getting out into the developing world. They're being used regularly for the kids in the United States. And so that is the single biggest thing, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say that has been huge.
You're going to agree on this?
On this one, I would agree on what advance has been made, because when you look at childhood deaths, I mean, this is where Bill and I really started, was saying, could you really do something about all these childhood deaths around the world? And it is the vaccines that make just a phenomenal amount of difference.
The problems are so enormous. Sometimes do you feel it's like throwing something into the ocean and the ripples extend, but eventually it just goes back to the way it was? Or do you feel there's lasting impact?
I see it time and time again. You talk to these mothers who line up to get vaccines for their kids. They walk in the heat because they know it'll transform their lives. So when I look at something like this immunization effort, 2.5 million kids are alive because of that effort that wouldn't have been there before. So when I go out and meet people and see what the difference is, then you don't lose hope. You really don't.